Good afternoon. This is Charlie with Only PVC Pyramids. And today's video is called The Aether Research of John Keely, Wilhelm Reich, and Viktor Schauberger. This is part of our Fundamentals of Pyramid Science series, and this is part 2 of that series. Today we're going to be discussing what the ether is and 3 of the early pioneers in ether research. Those 3, again, are John Keely, Wilhelm Reich, and Viktor Schauberger. Before we begin that research investigation, however, I wanted to go over a definition and an introduction to the concept of ether that comes from David Wilcock's Science of Oneness book, which is on his website, divinecosmos.com. To read from David's introduction on the ether: we live in a harmonic universe built upon a unified, unseen foundation of conscious, loving energy, known as zero-point energy or ether. Up until the 20th century, all Western scientific traditions proposed that such an energy force existed, going back to at least the time of the ancient Greek philosophers and most likely to a far older civilization with advanced scientific knowledge. The existence of the ether was supposedly proven to be false by the Michelson-Morley experiment at the beginning of the 20th century, and most scientists still believe that that is correct. There are a number of reasons why the M&M experiment is flawed, and for our technically inclined readers, many of the researchers that we will be mentioning in as David is in his book and in this series, have detailed explanations of how that was misinterpreted. We know that an etheric science is the only remaining model of the universe that fits together with the evidence now available. Current theories working with these ether concepts all agree that our physical reality arises from this hidden energy substance, which creates all that we know and see by vibrating. And thus, like fishes in the sea, the pressure of this energetic fluid constantly surrounds us, though we do not normally notice its presence. In this wealth of new data, the etheric fluid is a source of tremendous energy that is in constant vibrational motion, flowing through all objects in the universe, creating and recreating them every second, just as a candle flame is constantly absorbing new wax and oxygen and radiating new heat and light, but still continues to exist as a measurable unit. Should this ether ever stop flowing and swirling about with such an intelligent, purposeful behavior, all mass would shed heat, gradually dissolve, and return to its primordial energy state. The flame would go out. Indeed, this new physics of the 21st century tells us that the very building blocks of mass, the atoms of molecules themselves, are not particles at all. They are ultimately instead nothing more than spherical whirlpools of energy in this flowing river of ether. And the ether itself provides the most tangible scientific way to define, explain, and even engineer the mind of God. The research that we're going to be talking about today of these 3 giants is coming directly from a book that was written about 20 years ago by Dan Davidson. It's called Shape Power, a treatise on how form converts universal ether into electromagnetic and gravitic forces and related discoveries in gravitational physics. The first of the explorers into the ether that we want to talk about today is John Keely. Now, John Keely is not someone that I ever heard of until I got into this area, but I think he, along with the others that you're going to find a pattern in these 3 people. They all figured out the ether. They all figured out how to use it and harness it, and they were all either scorned or put out of business or threatened to keep their experimental knowledge out of the mainstream. So John Keely was born about in the 1800s, and to skip to the important parts of his life, in about 1866, while subjecting water to various sound vibrations, Keely had an explosion in his laboratory which wrecked his apparatus. And this event was a turning point in his scientific dabbling, and for 6 years of intense experimentation, Keely worked to duplicate the effect of converting water to energy with sound vibration. He found that under certain conditions, a frequency of 42,800 vibrations per second would convert water to pure energy. Not steam, hydrogen, or oxygen, but a much more potent, higher powered energy, which Keely came to believe was the luminiferous ether, the very energy out of which the universe was formed. And Keely's discovery of the dissociation or etherealization of water was a fantastic discovery in and of itself, but Keely was intent on discovering all the physics behind this phenomenon. During his career, Keely used the basic discovery of converting water to pure energy to build many demonstrations utilizing that force to lift huge weights, control the force of gravity by making objects lighter or heavier, propelling projectiles, and many others. The water etherealization effect was perfected by Keely to the point of being able to break down the atomic nucleus into 27 levels or gradations of finer and finer energies. This is akin to modern physics, where they have found numerous subatomic particles, which are the building blocks of the nuclear particles such as protons, electrons, and neutrons. Keely claimed that there were countless phenomena associated with each of these energy levels within the nucleus. And some of these included energies which governed how the brain and mind operated, how gravity was produced, and what the forces were that created electricity and magnetism. Now to get into some interesting commercial attempts to put this into commercialization. In 1874, a group of investors formed around Keely the Keely Motor Company with the expressed intention of exploiting this newfound etheric force by using it to power motors. The company proved to be only a burden to Keely and of no practical assistance in his research. He wasn't a businessman, and the affairs of the company did not interest him. As a result, the motor company was eventually dissolved, but not until its founders had exploited his stock for everything they could squeeze out of the company, leaving Keely holding the bag. However, I was able to find some interesting data, which is kind of beyond the scope of this discovery, but this next page here is a page from a source that I have linked down below. It's a picture of this motor, and it's a letter which in its entirety is in the link below from the editor of something called Scientific Arena in July of 1886. And what it talks about, we'll just read this first paragraph. These experiments have continued till satisfactory all around, and until many present have been supplied with flattened bullets. The final and most important demonstration of all was given in the actual running of the Keely motor itself, of which the world has heard so much, and which consisted of a 25 horsepower rotary engine actuated alone by this so-called etheric vapor. And here we approach the description of a performance in very simple machinery for which our readers will need to summon all their resources of credulity in order not to suspect us of deliberate fabrication. But we declare in advance that we are about to state the facts of which we are as positively certain as we are that we were personally then and there present. And in the rest of that letter, they go on to talk about the fact that this engine ran on water alone. Now, there's a lot more that we could talk about Keely at this point, but suffice it to say that his company was never allowed to function. The shareholders were squabbling. In my opinion, it would be interesting research for those that are interested to find out why, since this motor functioned properly, it never got to market. I think we can all kind of have some ideas as to why that might be the case. But here's a researcher who did a tremendous amount of work, did work in levitation as well, and we've never heard of his work in mainstream science. The second person we want to talk about is Wilhelm Reich. I think most of us have heard of Reich and know of his work. Wilhelm Reich was born in 1897 in Austria and got his training at the University of Vienna from 1918 to 22, where he finished a 6-year medical degree in only 4 years. His postgraduate work was in neuropsychiatry and internal medicine. He was one of Sigmund Freud's star pupils and worked as first clinical assistant for 6 years at Freud's psychoanalytic polyclinic from 24 to 30. From 30 to 33, he founded various mental hygiene centers in Austria and Germany, and he left Austria and Germany for Norway to escape persecution by the Nazis. Reich discovered orgone energy while he was searching for an energy that was part of neurotic behavior. His breakthrough research in orgone physics was started in Oslo, Norway at the Psychological Institute of Oslo University. In 1939, Reich moved his Norway laboratory to Forest Hills, New York, where he eventually acquired United States citizenship. He was an associate professor of medical psychology in New York City and at his New School for Social Research, where he lectured on his discoveries in orgone energy. In 1942, Reich set up his research facility, the Orgone Institute, in Rangeley, Maine, and he termed his new science orgonomy. The main theme of his research is that orgone energy is a condensed form of etheric energy, the orgone box, which he invented, with its layering of natural dielectric and conductive materials, collects and intensifies orgone energy so it can be utilized. And orgone energy has potential uses in the health science to bring about better, more natural, non-invasive forms of healing and therapy. We didn't go into it in any great detail, but the end of his career was one where the FDA vilified his work and ruined his career. So here's another example of a pioneer in orgone research and etheric research whose career was ruined by the powers that be. The third that we want to talk about today is Viktor Schauberger. Photo here of Viktor. Viktor was born in Vienna, Austria, and from childhood, Viktor was at home in the forest, was a close observer of nature, the animals, earth, trees, and water. Water was to become his lifelong passion, and he determined at a very early age to discover the laws and secrets of water. Schauberger saw water as a living substance filled with life and life's energies. Schauberger pursued private research. His first development was a machine which would provide good drinking water that was alive with natural, vital energy. This was an egg-shaped container which had a simple, small impeller in the bottom of the container. The impeller would spin at a very high speed and cause the water to form into a natural vortex, i.e. a three-dimensional spiral. Viktor had discovered that when water or any other fluid or gas was spun in a vortex, it would pick up an energy charge. And this prototype has been adapted, obviously, but is now a very popular water machine. There's a number of them. The Vitalizer Plus is probably the most well-known structured water device in the world. Viktor Schauberger discovered a universal energy which was the opposite from normal electricity. It existed everywhere and was the basic foundation of life and substance. Basically, Viktor rediscovered the ether as diamagnetism, the same as Reich had discovered the ether as orgone energy. Diamagnetism was conducted by non-conductors, hence the reason he called it diamagnetism, after the scientific term for a non-conductor. Schauberger discovered that diamagnetism, or the ether, would follow spiral and vortical pathways, and that these types of pathways would act as connectors of diamagnetism. By forcing fluids to move in special vortex guides, he could cause the fluid to be charged with diamagnetism, which in turn would cause the atoms of the fluids to collect an electrostatic charge. Gravity was also found to be related to diamagnetism. By moving the ether in a vortical pattern, matter within the vortex would lose weight and levitate. This effect was the basis, listen to this, of his disk-flying machines. Schauberger experimented with various hydrodynamic fluids such as water, air, and sand as the basis for the material he ran through his levitation motors. Healthful, life-giving effects were also discovered to be associated with diamagnetism. Viktor found that when foods and beverages were charged with diamagnetism, they improved a person's health. Now, to expand a little bit on the subject that I'm sure all of you are most interested in, by 1930, Schauberger had developed anti-gravity machines which could fly much higher and faster than any known aircraft of the day, and developed free energy devices which achieved tremendously higher output than input power. The gravity machines resemble flying saucers or UFOs, and are documented, as have been documented by thousands of observers over the years. And a couple of the pictures of Schauberger's experimental craft are shown on the next page. In 1934, Viktor was, quote-unquote, requested to meet with Hitler, and Hitler offered Schauberger a job as a scientist developing aircraft based upon the anti-gravity discoveries. When Schauberger refused, Hitler put Viktor's family in a prison camp, which forced Viktor to work on his inventions for Hitler. He worked for the Third Reich on anti-gravity craft from 1938 until 1945. When the Allied forces took over Germany, the Army Intelligence Corps discovered Schauberger's research, including several unfinished disk craft. This brought a new peril to Schauberger in the form of vested interests who did not want free energy technology to be released for public use. And Viktor Schauberger died a broken man, and about 10 years later, in I believe it was around 1958, after he apparently refused to assist American corporations who were attempting to exploit the technologies that had been taken from him at the end of World War II. So here we see three early pioneers into the science available from the ether, and we've seen three different applications of a motor that could run on water. We saw a box that could create and store etheric energy. And finally, with Viktor Schauberger, we saw how water and ultimately that technology was transformed into anti-gravity machines. And all of these devices have ultimately gone out of the mainstream scientific community and have been put pretty much under wraps by government and other forces. So the ether exists, and now that we've seen what's happened in the past, in the next series we're going to go over some more contemporary research that demonstrates even further the validity of the ether and torsion fields in that ether. As always, remember to tell your friends about our YouTube channel, Only PVC Pyramids, and our website, onlypvcpyramids.com. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.